Hi, this is Chris Haughey. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. Do you love the farmhouse style? I'll show you a unique and easy technique that adds both depth and dimension, making anyone look like a pro. Plus, we'll be using layered pieces to bring this design to life in a way that's truly one of a kind. No talent, no problem. Just a few supplies and a little creativity are all you need. So grab your brushes and your creativity and let's get started. I wanted to try something a little different and use the separate pieces. However, if you just wanted to paint them on, that's certainly an option. I do always seal my surfaces. This is MDF, and I seal it well with a multi-purpose sealer. Just get those strokes on there nice and smooth. And while I'm at it, I'll seal these separate pieces. Lightly sanded after it's dry, and it just ensures that the paint's going to adhere well and it's much more gentle on your brushes. I'm base coating the entire back piece with Snow White, and usually what I do is start in the middle and paint toward the edges. I do one end, turn it around, and then paint the other end. Because it's white, it's going to take several coats to give a nice opaque coverage. I usually keep my strokes all vertical, and that way if they're not exactly opaque, it's still going, and you can see strokes in there, it's still going to look good. I put the frame on for placement, and I'm taking this doily. I believe it's a 4-inch doily. I want to make sure that I have the bottom tips just barely above the bottom of the frame. It's so much easier to check at this point to make sure placement is correct. And then I put the mason jar on there, make sure I have enough room at the top for the flowers. If you do pick up a pattern, there is a link below, and I have it all traceable that's all laid out so you won't have to fuss with this. But I'm marking the bottom edge of the jar, and I'm just going to remove the jar, remove the frame, and then I want to mask off that bottom area. Now, if you don't have a plastic stencil, you can also use a paper doily, and that works just as well. You just have to be careful not to saturate it because it's paper and it doesn't hold up really well. I use my T-square to get an exact straight tabletop line, and I'm taping that doily in place. And make sure that's down nice and tight. We want a nice sharp edge. I've loaded my spectacular stencil brush with Stormy. I wipe it over a paper towel to remove the excess paint, and then I just begin to gently, it's a circular kind of dry brush stencil. This also allows the paint to get in and around all of those little cutout areas on the doily, and I let it fade out toward the outer edges. I want it to be darker underneath that doily and just a little bit lighter toward the outer edges. This is a very minimal application of paint. If it's too wet or it's too heavy, all those little cutouts will start to fill up and the paint's going to bleed through. I want to make sure I maintain a nice crisp edge. I let it dry really well, loading my stencil brush with Payne's Gray, much darker. I want those insets or those cutout areas in the doily to really stand out. Contrast, all about contrast, dark and light. And then towards the bottom, I'm going to blend it out. Always wipe that brush off. I'm going to stipple that in there just a little bit stronger. Like I said, I want these areas to be really dark and prominent. This doily adds so much detail. It's such a simple way to create it. It's just amazing, almost magical. Now I'm just blending it out from that bottom edge toward the outer corners. And you can see how that stencil brush is a soft bristle brush, and it's so easy to manipulate and blend it out nice and quiet. Let that dry really well, and you can see how great that doily has been stenciled in there. I'm putting the painter's tape along the top edge of the table so I can paint in the background. And I'm using my 3/4 inch oval wash and gingham blue. and the paint is fairly wet. I've picked up a good bit of moisture. I'm using a slip slap stroke to just kind of apply it. It's not random. I start in the bottom right and blend it up towards the middle and the top. You can see brush strokes, but it's just a very soft slip slap. I try to blend those brush strokes together. I did go back and add a second coat. I can still see my brush strokes, but I want that movement in the background. Picked up a little bit of Stormy, apply it in the bottom right, and let it blend out towards the middle and the top. I'm going in now with Twilight, and I put it on the toe of my 1/2 inch angle, and I wanted these corners to be darker, but I wanted them a different color, so it just adds another level of color. And this is Amazement. I just thought it might be fun to add something unexpected, and that's just a hint of color. I'm not adding much. Going back with a little bit of that Twilight just to bring some more color in there. I'm sorry, that was Stormy. Now I've picked up Snow White with my number 10 filbert. My filberts are a little bit longer length, so I can create these petals with one stroke. Press down, kind of twist, and pull it toward the center. Press down, twist, and lift it up. Slow, steady strokes. Super easy to create those. Just going in to add base coats. Same thing, just press down and pull toward the center. This is Coral Buzz. I don't want all my petals to be the same length, and don't worry about that center, just leave it hollow. This is Fresh Mango, one of the new colors also. Press down and pull out. And I can create different shapes of flowers just by how I manipulate my press and pull. This is Love Potion, and this is just another press and pull. These are short strokes, and I do 2 to every petal just for a little variety. These flowers are so much fun because you can change up the colors to any color that you prefer, maybe to go with your decor. This is Lavender Haze, and to create the roses, I'm using Crimson Red, and my angle, and I'm just kind of loosely stroking in kind of what I think the outer edge of the rose would be. It doesn't have to be perfect. I will just make it work. This is Fairway Green. I've picked it up on my Epic script liner. Thin that down so that the paint flows really smoothly off of the brush. And I'm just trying to decide where I want my leaves. And I've double loaded I started out with a number 8 flat and just double loaded it with Green Tree and the Fairway Green. I decided those were too small of a leaf, so I'm going back to a number 10 filbert, and I'm just touching, pressing, and pulling up, and these create perfect little pointy leaves. It may take a little bit of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's super easy to stroke those in. And I do load my brush with the Fairway Green, and I put a little bit, you can see a touch of that amazement on the toe or on the corner of the brush. It just gives a little more color. I decided to put the frame back so I knew where my leaf tips would be. I don't want them past the frame, and that way I know where placement is, but it's a little awkward with the frame on there. So once I know where they go, I can remove the frame and just pop them in. I'm adding the basic stems. This is so very loose and free-flowing. The foliage in the background, I'm just kind of tapping that in and around the flowers. Don't be too fussy about that. Picked up the baby duck and my number 10 filbert, and I'm just using that to loosely stroke in the flower centers. Some of the flowers are facing a little bit different directions, so they don't have to be smack dab in the middle. nor do they need to be perfectly round. They can just be whatever the brush creates, works super well. Picked up a little bit of watermelon slice, kind of floating against that flower center, and then I pull it out using the chisel edge just to kind of pull it out and down those petals. Almost creates that look of veining. So you float it across, pull it down, pull it down, pull it down. Super quick way to add those floats. And I'm just going with a tone darker. This is the Lavender Haze, and I'm using Twilight on that. It has a purple base. You see how I float, pull out, pull out, pull out. Just creates that darkness around the flower center. This is Gingham Blue, and I tried to be a little careful because that's also my background color. I didn't want my daisy to blend in. This is the Coral Buzz. I thought I would try something a little different with this flower. I wanted to use not normal colors. I wasn't real crazy about that. Don't be afraid to try something. I switched over to, it's a darker purple. I'm using all these new colors and I kind of lose track of what the colors are. Black or Cherry Merlot. And it looks beautiful with the Love Potion. Picked up a touch of that Coral Buzz. I like the way it looked, but it wasn't the shading color. So I'm popping that on the tips. Unexpected. Try different color combinations. This is Tiger Lily. I'm putting that on the Fresh Mango. Changes the whole tone of that flower. It's just so much fun to play around with these colors. And I tried to step a little bit out of my comfort zone and try colors that I wonder what would happen if, and if, yeah, I guess I look at it this way, if it doesn't work out, you just change it back or do a different color. Brought a little bit of that Tiger Lily into that Coral Buzz. It really worked well. It was so pretty. And then I thought, well, maybe I would try that Fresh Mango, and that looked pretty too. And with these different colors on the flowers, it just looks like light is bouncing off of them. And I'm just putting little hints of color kind of here and there. Now I'm staying in sort of the same color family. This is Lemon Burst. This is that super strong new yellow that Deco Art has. It really is an attention grabber. Very bright, very bold. I popped a little bit into the flower centers. I'm thinking my light source is sort of kind of the top left. I just take the toe or the point of my brush and kind of pop that in. I picked up some of that Love Potion. I thought that would be pretty on the white flower. I didn't want it to be a stark white flower, but I don't want it to be blue or purple either. So I just have just a hint of color on my brush. Should it become too purple or too blue, I would just go back and brighten up the white. It's so much fun to paint with confidence of knowing that you really can't make a mistake. Now I've just picked up a little bit of, I had that Love Potion on my brush. I picked up a little bit of white to highlight the tips on that flower. And it just really, it looks super strong, but it's going to tone down as it dries. Going back with a little bit of pure white just to brighten up some of the tips. I don't like to do all of them equally. I like to give it just a little bit of a variance because not all of the petals are going to stand up perfectly in the sunlight. There's where I go back and brighten my white flower up. It was getting a little bit dull. And so I'm pulling in some brighter colors on that. A little bit less as I get to the right side. And again, as it dries, it's going to tone down. And adding a little bit of highlight on the top left of the flower centers. When I do one, I kind of jump around and do all of them. This is where it's shaded a little bit more, so I went back to that Tiger Lily just to pop a little bit more color in there. And then after I did that, the tips needed brightened up a little bit more. It's it's a balance between the bright and the dark tones. So when you deepen an area, you'll also need to brighten to balance it out. And I just went back with a little bit of lavender haze, and I'm not doing every petal. I just played around with it. If it looks lopsided, I can go back and add more. But this is just a little bit. And those petals on the right shouldn't be as bright. Picked up some of the baby duck to highlight these petals on that pink flower. I really wanted them to stand out, but be careful, I didn't want them to blend in with the orange flower either. I double loaded my angle with coral buzz on the toe and watermelon slice on the heel, just kind of swiping. I do the back petal, and then I do 2 back petals, the front barrel, and then a swoop in front, and then just kind of pull some little petals in. I keep this very loose. It's not a complicated rose. I will be the first to admit I'm not the best rose painter. However, I have some tricks that are really fun to make the roses look really good. Bringing in a little bit of that love potion to add a little more color on that lavender flower, just enough to brighten that up and add a hint. Look what a difference just that little bit of color makes on that. To me, it went from boring to just a little more exciting. And I'm just kind of looking to see, I thought that flower looked a little bit dull, so I'm adding some, I didn't like the lavender haze on it, so I just did a light wash of the love potion over top of that, picked up a little bit of white and just brightened it up, and that's what it needed. The blue just made it look too dark, and oftentimes blue is a cooler color and it works better in shaded areas as far as trying to decide whether it's a highlight or whether it should be kept in the shadows. Just adding some more highlight on some of those petals. Picked up a hint of white and the coral buzz. I thought that flower was getting a little orange, so I just wanted to brighten that up a touch more. Liking the way that looks. You see how it really stands out, and all of a sudden you can see where the light's hitting it the strongest. Don't be afraid to change the colors. If you're not liking the way it goes, change it out. Now I've just loaded the toe of my angle with Snow White. And look how I'm just kind of floating some of those petals in there. Very, very thin. And so I can just highlight the tips of those petals. And my roses really end up looking not too bad. I think when you look at it, you can tell it's a rose. I picked up just a little bit of amazement just on the toe of my brush, and I'm using my number 10 flat, and I'm just highlighting kind of the top and the left side of the leaves, and it really is not that important, just kind of the tips. If you think about where the light's going to hit it, wherever you put it, the highlight, that's going to pop out a little bit more. And just stroke that in very lightly, just a hint of color. It doesn't take much. It's loose, it's not smooth, it's not even, just a touch here and there, but it's very thin, so it's a watered down highlight. And then I'm just adding little touches in and around the flowers. Picked up a little bit of fairway green on the toe of my dirty brush and just kind of tapping in some hints of loose greenery in the background, just softly touching that in. So it's nothing fussy, just little touches here and there, just kind of fills in that background. Now I'm using my 1/4 inch angle, and I've loaded black forest green, and this is a very powerful color, so I'm just shading it along the shaded areas of the leaf, and they're not smooth even floats. A little bit of an uneven float can actually make a little more character to the leaf. And just touching little hints of shading. I can go on the chisel edge of my brush and pull down a straight line if I need to add a stem, but I try to keep it darker close to the flowers. The tips are going to be, of course, a little bit brighter, but you can see how I can just use the toe of my brush to tap in color, and then I float with a little bit of shading to darken those leaves up. Look how rich they become, just that little bit of color. Makes them, it goes from flat to just a little more depth and a little more weight to them. Just touching that in here and there, and you can see how watery that is. It just helps to fill in any of those void areas that are just a little bit empty. I don't think I put highlights on those little leaves. They look kind of flat, so I'll just go back and add that later on. Now remember where the jar placement is, so you need to make sure you stay out of that area. Those leaves were done with a smaller flat. I did go back and make them just a little bit bigger so they'd be more consistent. They can overlap. They can, you know, just play with it. This is citron green. This is going to read as a little bit of sunshine. This is a color that is, it has a lot of yellow in it, and yellow characteristically is just a little bit on the translucent side. So is a citron green. And I'm just going to put touches of highlights. This is not a big heavy float. This is, if you think about it, like a little sparkle of light here and there. Helps to break up any dark areas. It's just going to read as highlights on the stems. Now back in behind there won't be a lot of light because it's tucked in behind the flowers, so there'll be a good bit of shading back there. But you could pop some highlights in there because we're going to go back and add a little bit of shadowing in there just to kind of separate everything out a little bit. And you can see I'm just barely touching it, just a little hint. And it just adds that sparkle, almost like the sunlight's dancing off of the leaves. These are the parts of the design I really enjoy doing because it's not fussy and it doesn't have to be anything fancy or perfect. In fact, I think sometimes just a little bit of irregularity, to me, I call that personality. Picking up that lemon burst, I'm just highlighting those center veins a little bit. And it really wasn't showing up well, so I went back to that citron green. It's just, I'm toggling back and forth. That one center line, if it's too heavy and dark, I can go back and brighten it. This is really a great way to add. It looks like tiny little detail, and it's just a simple stroke work. Just going back between lemon burst and matcha green. Sometimes that matcha green blends in too much. Grab a little bit of the lemon burst. If it's too bright, just pick up some of that citron. See how I go in and add just little strokes here and there. Just little touches. A little bit of paint makes such a big difference. Went back with a little bit of white to brighten up some of those white petals. They get just a little bit dusky looking. Not all of them, just some of them. You can see how they're a lot more bright. And then I'm just adding some highlights on some of the petals. Because the light source is coming from the same direction, all of the flowers should have the same reflective value on them. So if I'm adding brightness on one flower, the other flower should have even brightness because it's all from the same light source. And look how that really pulls those flowers out. And we added a lot of brightness on it before, but this really ramps that brightness value up quite a bit more. Again, when it dries, it won't be quite this strong. Brighten those centers up just a little bit more. Making the doily look like it has folds and layers is so simple and so impressive. I've just loaded a touch of Stormy on the toe of my 1/2 inch angle, and I'm kind of just coaxing it up toward the middle center of the doily. And the float has a lot of water in it. It's just a hint of color. Up there at the top, it's going to be a little bit more shaded. And remember that mason jar is going to sit there as well. So it just needs to have some darker areas. Think about how it folds and the highlights on that. And I have so much moisture on my brush, I can go in and move it around quite a bit. I just touched a couple places on the ends, and look at that. It really looks very dimensional at this point. I picked up just a hint of Twilight, has a little bit of a purple hue to it, and it's just going to bounce add a little more color, make it look like that background is bouncing off. This is optional, but I think this is such a sweet way to add delicate detail, and it looks very intricate. I'm just adding little tiny snow white dip dots around the bottom edge of that doily. And I usually dip and dot twice and then reload. It usually makes the dots pretty consistent. But then again, where the folds are, sometimes as it goes in those folds, they can be a different size. Oh my goodness, this is my favorite part. I'm using a .05 black micron pen, just adding some little scribbles around the base of that flower center, very loosely going to outline these petals. This absolutely creates such a huge difference. This takes it from, it looks a little bit rough and unfinished, and even though these pen work lines around the outer edge of the petals aren't perfect and exactly even, that little sketchy pen work is so very artistic. I outline the petals very loosely, a couple lines, not exact, and then add a few little veins that go down the petals. Just dresses it up and elevates it tremendously. I'm going around these little short rounded petals, and when I pull those veins down from the center, I kind of curve them, and it makes those petals look more rounded than just a flat petal. And it's just so very relaxing to do this. It doesn't take a lot of time. I just absolutely love it, and the effects that it produces, just amazing. So the only thing that you really need to remember is that the paint needs to be extremely dry. If you're working with any damp paint, you run a really high risk of clogging up the pen tip. Make sure that paint is super dry before you begin your pen work. The other factor that you need to keep in mind, and sometimes it's hard to slow down because it's so exciting and it's so much fun and it's so easy to go fast. But if the pen travels faster than the ink can flow down the tip, it will begin to skip. So if you notice that the pen has started to skip, all you need to do is slow down just a little bit. And look how it builds those areas up. Just absolutely amazing what this little bit of pen work can do to these painted flowers. It just elevates them and really ramps it up considerably. All that little detail, it looks so intricate and so perfect. I'm starting to line the stems and the leaves, and I just go ahead and kind of sketch in a center vein, and you can see how loosely the leaves are outlined. Even those little washes of color, I can just indicate that there is a leaf there. It just makes such a world of difference. I'm always amazed. It's almost magical the way that it transforms this unfinished strokes of paint and creates something so professional looking. And I do kind of scratch in the green foliage area between the flowers. I can draw in a bit of stem work and scribble in some leafy like indications. It doesn't have to be exact or perfect. It just adds that little bit. And I do rotate my plaque to make it easier to add the line work. I find for me that if I pull the pen toward myself, so I just pivot and rotate to make it just a little more comfortable for me to add that. On these roses, oh my goodness, I'm just kind of doing a swirl in that center area and then pulling, and you can't see because the camera's right above, but just pulling those little petals around. Look at that. Is that just amazing the way that turns out? Decided to add some little dip dots in the center of the flowers, and I'm using Baby Duck and my stylus, and then I went back with a little bit of Snow White to brighten up those dots. Adding white dip dots in the flower centers, it just makes them look a little more sparkly and whimsical, and it brightens them up tremendously. It's all these little touches that actually don't take a lot of time, but it's that one more element that adds that wow factor. And that's what we're always looking for. And you can see how that brightens it up. I thought since it brightened the flower centers up that it probably would be kind of adorable to add some little dip dots in and around the flowers, just to break up that darkness in the area. I'm base coating the mason jar with gingham blue using my 3/4 inch oval wash and just stroking it on evenly. And I'm just making sure to pull it from the center out so that I don't have any drips running down the side edges. I picked up Dragon Teal, and with my 1/2 inch awesome angle, I'm floating around the outer edge of the jar, and I have a lot of water in my brush, and I'm really scrubbing that in to get a nice soft float. And make sure you have enough moisture on your brush that you can really manipulate that paint, move it around. There's going to be some shadowing underneath those ridges and those rims. I'm just basically using the toe of my brush almost like a liner and just pulling those ridges across. Don't worry about being real precise. You just need to indicate those areas. By the time we add the shading and the highlighting, it all works out really well. I've picked up some fairway green on my radical round, and I counted the flowers. There are 7 flowers, so there need to be 7 stems. And I wanted to add these in before I add the shading and the highlighting on the jar. I wanted them to not only fill up the jar, but kind of overlap. Make sure they go clear up to the top of the rim. I wasn't sure about bringing them all the way to the bottom. They don't all have to be even at the bottom. Just very loosely painting those in. Now I'm picking up some of that black forest green to add a little bit of darkness. It's the same thing as the leaves. We're just going to toggle between the bright and the dark. This is the Amazement, and I've just added a bit. I picked up the Amazement and the black forest green, and I'm just putting the indication of leaves in there. And no, I'm not being particular because there's going to be a lot of shading and highlighting on the jar itself, so these are going to be pushed in the background. I did want to add some highlights on the stems, and I picked the ones that are going to be in the forefront. So it's the ones behind can be a little bit darker. You don't want them all highlighted the same. So just kind of skipping some highlights down there, here and there. That's my favorite word. Make sure those stems go to the top. Just adding in some more leaves and foliage. You know how it gets in as it's bunched up toward the neck of the bottle, it's going to be closer together and a little bit heavier and thicker. I did allow it to dry really well, and now I'm just kind of loading my radical round with white, and I picked up a hint of that gingham blue. I want to create that water line, and I don't want it to be solid all the way across. I want it to be very strong and very visible. Pulling some gingham blue down just underneath the water, it gets a little bit distorted, so that creates that distortion. Picked up Snow White on the toe of my angle to float some highlights across the rim and the ridges, down this left side, pulling it down the jar. This is a very light float. I have a lot of water on my brush. I'm of the mindset that I can always go back and add more, but if I add it too heavy, it will make it hard to mute it down. If bring some strong highlights down, not hard to paint at all. Everything just is going to look underwater. It's just going to kind of blend together. We just need those strong highlights and shaded areas. And with that paint being very wet, it's so easy to kind of manipulate it and move it around and create that look. As this dries, it will soften down quite a bit. White always looks so very strong when it's wet, and as it dries, it just becomes very subtle. Picking up a little bit of Stormy, I want to darken the bottom, and my highlights or my light source is more from the left. So I'm going to darken the bottom and the right side just a little bit stronger. I don't want to take away those white highlights, but I do want to add some strong shading on that. And with the background being blue, bringing those blue highlights and shaded areas forward is just going to reflect off of that background. So I'm just kind of adding in between some of the stems, just that hint of that background. And I think it works really well. Picking up a little bit of Snow White on my Epic script liner, and I can add super strong highlights, just enough to really make that jar sparkle. Sparkle it across the top of the water line, and just pull some random highlights down the jar. Once I'm satisfied with the result, I'll just pop it back in place. I want to add a little bit of a shadow below the vase or below the jar, and pull some Payne's Gray shading down the right side of the mason jar. Just going to give a little more drama to the background. I'm loading my Radical Round with thinned Payne's Gray. This is such a powerful color. It just needs to be super, super thin. I'm adding a very thin, transparent shadow below and to the right of all of the leaves and all of the flowers. And I did remove the mason jar, so I was able to work a little bit better. But you can see how loosely I'm just mimicking the shape of the leaves, and it just lifts them off the background. I can add it in wherever it needs a little more separation. Picked up just a touch on the toe of my angle. I'm going to separate where these flower petals overlap and create a shadow. Look how that pushes that petal back and lifts that other flower forward. Very, very light float. This is such a powerful color, and it can overwhelm and become strong so easily. Shaded the right side of the roses. Payne's Gray works really well with just about every color. See how nicely that creates those shaded areas on the roses. So between the pen work and all the highlights, now we're adding this deep shading. Picked up just a hint of that dragon teal and gingham blue, just to add a light touch of that turquoise blue color on some of the shaded areas on the flowers and the leaves. It just helps to pull everything together. Now we have that blue continuity on the background on the mason jar, and now I'm pulling it through on the flowers. Such a simple touch of color, but I think it really is one of those true instances where a little bit of paint makes such a big difference. It's just a hint of color. This project is really different than what I normally do, but it's so much easier, and it makes it more open for freedom to just express and create your own fingerprint and artwork. So let me know what you think, and be sure to share it with your artistic friends. I added citron green dip dots to the leaves. I'm not sure why it didn't get filmed, but I added them on the highlighted side. I am using the Triangle Cosmetic Sponge to paint the frame. I don't want the sides of the frame to get white on them. The bottom of the Triangle sponge is super flat, super dense. I dampened the sponge, scrunched in a paper towel to get rid of the excess moisture, and I've just tapped it on my palette to load it evenly with the white paint, and then I can lightly touch down to apply it to not only the frame but the little tag. Those side edges stay clean, and it just provides a beautiful finish, but it will take at least 2 to 3 coats to cover it because it's not a heavy coverage. If you decide to push a little harder to get more mileage out of the sponge, it's just going to smush down the edges. So just be patient, have a light touch, and let the paint just flow on nice and even. And the sides will stay perfectly clean, and there won't be any touch-up work that's needed. It's always nice to take that extra step to prevent a lot of work at the end. Loading the toe of my 1/2-inch angle with a teeny bit of Stormy and just floating a hint of color around the outer edge of the tag. And with the longer length angles, I can float all the way around the tag without reloading. I wanted this to be a modern spin on the trendy farmhouse, so I decided to go with the checkerboard stencil. I was excited it fits so well on this frame. Once I position it, I tape it down with painter's tape so it won't move around. Load my stencil brush with soft black, and I'm just very carefully pouncing to apply paint with a light tap. If I swirl, it's going to be almost a dry brush effect. I want this to be a stronger checkerboard. Every time I reload, I do wipe it on a paper towel. This is another instance where it's more important to take your time and not pounce too heavily or not overload the brush. Both of these will cause the paint to seep underneath the stencil, and I will go back and apply 2 coats. Once I have it stenciled, I'll just lift the stencil, dry it really well. I don't want to put that tape on the wet paint. I can line up those little squares with the ones I've already stenciled, and then I continue around to stencil the complete border. Once it is dried, I am taking my 1/4-inch awesome angle, and I'm just floating a little bit of soft black, not only around the outer edge, but I'll let that dry and then float it around the inner edge. I think the checkerboard design is a little bit harsh, and this is going to soften it down, make it look a little more rustic, but still maintain that modern result. Use quite a bit of moisture to move that paint around so that I can blend it in nicely. And it really doesn't take long with these awesome angles. I can move that paint around quickly. You can see how soft that makes those edges. I think this is a small enough design that it doesn't compete with the busyness of the flowers. I wanted to add lettering on this, and I thought bloom would be fun. So I'm just using my 0.05 micron, and I'm just penning the words because I still want this to be a little bit country, farmhouse. I'm not too worried about it being perfect letters. Adding dip dots on the tips of the letters is always a great way to finish them up and maintain that whimsical effect. And then for an extra added design, I'll just take the pen and put a kind of a dash border around the outer edge. Again, make sure that that paint is dry. I do a line, a couple dashes. It's just a really quick, easy way to finish it off and still maintain that charm. And now that we have all the pieces painted, the only thing left to do is assemble them. I cut a long piece of hemp cording, long enough to wrap around the lip of the jar 3 times. Put a little dot of hot glue on the back and just press it down to secure it. I did use the hemp cording because I thought it would be a little bit flatter to adhere to the back of the panel. I tied a bow and I put 3 loops on each side, added a little bit of twine on the tag, glued the loose end of the tag and the bow all together. Once the bow is in place, I can kind of fluff those little loops. And I secured the tag so it doesn't move around. I did make a little gingham bow and glued it on top of the other bow. And then I'll cut each of these little hanging tails a different length. I think it just looks a little more interesting that way. I put hot glue in for immediate adhesion, and then I put tacky glue in so I know it's never going to fall off. Once I get that applied, I just turn it over, position it, and press it down to really make sure that it's going to adhere tightly. Now I can work on my frame using tacky glue. Just put a real nice even application on the back of the frame. I go all the way around, try not to have any big globs because that's definitely what will squish out. And then position the frame and make sure it's nice and even. I let it dry, and then I was looking at it and I decided that there were a couple places that seemed a little bit dark. So I just picked up some Snow White on my stylus, added a few dip dots here and there just to brighten those areas up. And there you have it, your own modern farmhouse mason jar masterpiece. I love how this turned out, and best of all, it was so easy. With just a few supplies and a little creativity, you can make something amazing. If you want to paint this yourself, everything I used is listed in the links below. Plus I have step-by-step instructions with a traceable to make it even easier. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. If you give this a try, share a photo. I'd love to see your creations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so you won't miss out on upcoming videos. Thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to our next adventure together. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference.